Hey budget gardeners, Vita Loca here. Join me today as we overwinter some plants. So let's go. Overwintering plants is a great way to save money when it comes to gardening. There's so many different plants that you can overwinter, and there are so many different ways that you can overwinter each of those plants. I love experimenting when it comes to overwintering plants. In fact, you really have nothing to lose, but you have a lot to gain if it works for you. Some plants I've been successful with, others didn't work so well. So each year I'm always trying something new. It is late summer, early fall here in New Hampshire. The weather has definitely cooled down. In fact, last night it hit 37 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty chilly, especially when it comes to tropical plants such as this one. I used to try to overwinter all my plants in one day as soon as a frost hit them. What I found was it was a lot of work, and it took me a long time, and it actually ended up being a process I didn't enjoy very much because I was overwhelmed. So this year I decided to do it in increments, just a small amount of plants each day. That way I don't feel so overwhelmed. Some of the plants still look very pretty, including this one right here, which is Dipladenia. But I want to start the process nevertheless because the days are limited and pretty soon it'll be too cold for these tropical plants. There's 3 plants we're going to be working with today, and I'll talk a little bit about each one. So let's get started. The white plant that you see is called Sweet Alyssum or Lobularia. That's a plant that I start from seed every year. In fact, I made a video recently showing my process for collecting the seeds. I'll put a link to it down in the description below. What we'll be doing with the Lobularia is we'll just be cutting it back and then pulling it out. The plant that we're going to be overwintering is this beautiful pink flower. You may know it as Dipladenia or Mandevilla. Some people pronounce it Mandevilla, I believe. Nevertheless, it is so pretty, and last year was my first year overwintering this plant. This plant may be hardy where you live, and you may be able to keep it outdoors all year long. Here in New Hampshire, it's considered an annual, and most people just buy a new plant every year. Last year, I bought a nice big container of them, and there were 3 or 4 plants in it. It was marked down at the end of the season from Home Depot. I bought them, I divided them, I potted them up. It was an experiment for me. I didn't really have much to lose, and I was so pleasantly surprised to see that the plants overwintered just fine for me. I overwintered them in my unheated garage. The garage has 2 interior walls, meaning walls that have a room in my house on the other side of them, and then 2 exterior walls. In other words, walls that on the other side is just the outdoor elements. Even though there are a couple of windows in there, they don't bring in a lot of light. So these plants were not under any sort of grow lights, and they really weren't getting much actual daylight. The plants were basically dormant. The leaves started to turn yellow. Many of the leaves started to drop. And all I did with these potted plants was check their moisture level. And when I felt like they were getting a little too dry, I gave them the smallest drink of water. So I basically checked on them once a month. The biggest lesson that I've learned and talked about in previous videos is if you're going to overwinter a plant like this one in an unheated space such as your garage, the one way that you're going to kill that plant is by giving it too much water. The plants are dormant, they don't need that much water. But also, if you let them fully dry out, they're going to die also. So it's a fine balance between giving them a tiny bit of water, but not too much. The other thing I learned was when it came time to wake these plants up, it took them a long time to actually start budding up and blooming for me. I did a little research and I found that they're tropical plants. They won't bloom for you until the right conditions are met in terms of heat. So as soon as the temperature started to warm up here, the plants started to bloom for me. I had to be patient, but it was well worth it. The first thing we're going to do is just remove the alyssum. I have some hand pruners here, and just to make my life easy, I'm going to cut the alyssum at the base. So that's one big plant right there that we've just cut back, and that can go in my compost pile. We'll cut this one as well. And then we have a third one on the back here that's going to get cut back and removed. Now, could I just take this potted plant and overwinter it as is in my unheated garage or indoors as a tropical houseplant or in my unheated basement where it would get a little bit of light? I could definitely do that at this point, but I like to overwinter a lot of plants potted up in containers. So this pot is very large. I don't have that much room for this many pots to put in my garage. So I prefer to basically downsize the plants. The next thing we're going to do is remove this plant from this large pot. I have 4, maybe 5 Dipladenias in my yard. So if I wanted to overwinter each of these in that big of a pot, it would just take up a lot of real estate, a lot of room. So for me, it's just easier to remove it from its larger pot and downsize it into a smaller container pot for the winter months. And the good news is I have all this soil that I can reuse when it comes to potting up, because it's very good potting soil mix. And the plants that I'm overwintering, they don't really necessarily need any fertilizer or nutrients because they're going to be going dormant. They just need some sort of a potting media that they can stay in during the winter months. The soil is pretty wet because I had this set up on drip irrigation, and I will continue to water it as I have this out on my porch. But the nights that it gets very cool, I can always bring it in. We still have a number of weeks left. I'm not ready to bring this into my garage quite yet, but I am ready to downsize it and bring it into a smaller container pot, preparing it for the winter months. As I find the roots for the alyssum that we cut back, I'm just pulling those roots out, removing any of the soil, and the alyssum roots can also go in my compost pile. So you can see the size of the top growth here, but look at the base. We took it out of that big container pot, and yes, there are quite a bit of roots here, but this can fit inside of a much smaller container pot, which would be a perfect size for overwintering in my garage. Also, I want to show you, I'm not going to divide this right now, but probably in the spring when I start waking this up, I can come in here with something like a hand pruning saw, and if I wanted to, I could make some divisions just to propagate this plant and create new plants. I could also come in and I could take cuttings in the springtime to create new plants that way. I'm just going to use a pot that I had another plant in, but I want to show you the size difference. So the Dipladenia was originally in this larger terracotta colored pot, and we're going to be moving it into a smaller pot, which in the end takes up a lot less room when it comes to overwintering. So I'm just going to put some of the potting mix in the bottom of the pot. It's already very wet, so I don't need to add any additional water. We're going to tuck in the roots. And when it comes to a planting depth, I just want to make sure that this part right here, the crown of the plant, is flush with the top of the pot. And then I can backfill. I want to push down so I can eliminate any air pockets that might be in here. We'll do the same on all sides of the plant. Now you may be wondering, why didn't I cut the plant back? The reason is we still have a number of weeks that I want to enjoy this plant outside. So for that reason, I don't want to cut it back. It has some beautiful blooms on it. I do know while this plant is outside, let's say on my porch, before I bring it in for overwintering, it's going to dry out quickly in a smaller pot. So I will have to water it more frequently outside while I'm enjoying the blooms. But again, once I bring it in to overwinter it, that's when I cut back on the watering. What I also like about a small pot is I feel like I have a lot more control in seeing the water and not overwatering it. If it was in a very large pot, I worry that I can't tell how much water is actually in the pot, and I may end up overwatering my plant. So I can just check the moisture level a lot easier in a smaller pot. Look how pretty that is. And it's going to be much happier in its smaller pot. I did remove the labels that were on here just so that it doesn't look so unsightly. And by the way, I don't spray anything when I do bring it into my garage for overwintering. Usually any of the pests that might be on there, any sort of creepy crawlies, they make their way out of the pot. But if you needed to, you could always spray them with some sort of an insecticide if that made you feel better, especially if you were going to bring the plant indoors for overwintering. And now I can enjoy these pots on my side porch. And if we have a night here or there where it's going to get very cold, let's say near freezing, I can always bring them inside just for the night and then bring them out the next day. Because this time of year, that's the way the weather is going to be. We're going to have days that are 75, 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Then we're going to have nights that dip below freezing. But I don't want to put this plant away for overwintering in my garage quite yet. It's so pretty, I want to enjoy it. The next plant that we're going to get ready for overwintering is called, I believe, Bird of Paradise. I also got this last year, end of the season, on clearance. In fact, This plant was in a big container pot with all those other Dipladenia plants. It was one big container pot that was marked down. I think it was like 75% off. So I basically took that container pot apart when I bought it and I potted up each individual plant. So when it came to this particular plant, there was only one plant in there, but then when I took it out of the pot, I was able to divide it and turn it into 2 plants. This was also an experiment for me. I did not want to bring this plant in or the Dipladenia because honestly, I don't have a lot of houseplants. I don't love babying a lot of these type of plants indoors. My big thing is I love to start a lot of annuals from seed. So this plant also overwintered in my unheated garage. It was an experiment because I had no idea if it was going to survive or not. I treated it the same way. It was not near a window. It also didn't have any sort of grow lights above it. It went dormant. The leaves got a little yellow, but then as soon as the weather started to warm up, it started to push out new growth. Now the sad part is I never took it out of the pot that it was in. In other words, I didn't pot it up into a beautiful pot. I didn't put it out on my porch for display. So one of my garden goals for next year is to definitely get this plant out on my porch, as well as the other plant that looks just like this one. What did end up happening is, well, weeds. They started to grow inside of the pot. So what we're going to do today is we're actually going to take this plant out of its pot. We're going to pull out any of the weeds, and we're going to see if the plant needs to be potted up, potted down, or just placed back in the pot that it's in. So I'm just going to press hard on the sides of the pot just to loosen up the soil. I'm turning it around as I do it. We have this right here, which I'm not sure if it's part of the weed or if it's part of that bird of paradise plant. And then we also have this right here. So let's go ahead and start taking this all apart and doing a little bit of investigation. I will be a little more gentle though, because I don't want to harm the plant itself, just in case those roots that we see at the bottom are part of this plant here. I'm just not that familiar with this plant. You know, where I live, it would probably be considered a house plant, I'm guessing. Although, like I said, I don't really have a lot of house plants, so I don't have a lot of experience when it comes to house plants. Before I got big into outdoor gardening, I definitely had houseplants. But as I got more and more into outdoor gardening, I shied away from indoor houseplants. So I'm just pulling off any of the weeds that have made their way at the base here. And I'm going to continue trying to remove some of the soil from the bottom here, just to loosen things up a little. It definitely appears that these roots go to the bird of paradise plant. So for that reason, we don't need to do anything more with the base here. We've removed any of the weeds that were in here. But I might as well come in here and just cut back any of these yellowing leaves just to clean it up a little bit. And I think it's fair game to put this plant back in this pot. So let's put some potting mix back in the bottom. We'll place our plant in the pot. Again, we just want to make sure that the base of the plant, which is like around here, is at the same level as the top of the pot, and then we can backfill. I probably could have done this job without taking the whole plant out of the pot, but I wanted to make sure that we got all of the weeds out. And I just wanted to check and see if this bird of paradise plant was too pot bound inside of this container pot, because this is the pot that I overwintered it in last year. So I wasn't sure if it had outgrown the pot, but it doesn't look like it had, so we can just use the pot again. So again, I'm just going to press down to remove any air pockets, and then we can backfill. As sad as it is that I never displayed this plant in my garden this year, well, it's never too late. Look how pretty it looks on the porch. There are certain plants, when I overwinter them, I want to keep them in soil and inside of a container pot, even if the plant is going to go dormant and it's going to stay in an unheated space such as my garage. But then there are a lot of other plants that I don't want to overwinter in soil. One of them is this plant here. This is called a Calla Lily. You can overwinter Calla Lilies a lot of different ways. You can overwinter them in the container pot that they're in, but again, remember that that takes up room and space. If you have the room and space, it's totally fine. But I don't have a lot of room in my garage. And for me, it's worked that I can take it out of the container pot, take all the soil off, and just overwinter it as a bulb. Again, depending on where you live, you might be able to keep a calla lily in your ground and it overwinters just fine. Where I live, this plant is not hardy. A lot of people buy them year after year and treat them as annuals. That can get very expensive, so I prefer to overwinter it. And I have videos showing my process for overwintering this plant as well as waking it up out of dormancy. What I'll do is put links to those videos in the description as well as up above. I've started the process of overwintering my calla lilies a little early. Normally you want to wait until a frost has hit it. But I feel like it's gotten enough energy at this point. Our temperatures are definitely cooling down. So I've already shown you in previous videos what I've been doing, but let's go ahead and tackle this pot together. So we're just going to dump out the pot. We're going to remove any of the potting mix as it just falls apart. And I do have a tag here that says the name of this calla lily. It's called Garnet Glow. It was a new one that I bought for myself this year. And what's nice when you overwinter a plant like this is not only do I not have to buy it again next year, but then it's guaranteed that it's going to multiply in size. So you end up with more and more of this plant each year. And all I'm doing is I'm trying to remove as much of the soil as I can from the base. And as I'm doing that, the plant fell apart, meaning it divided itself. So I ended up so far with 1, 2, and then a much larger third plant. I don't like to force the divisions, but if they're going to fall apart on their own, then that's great. I just want to show you what the bottom looks like. So this is the bulb. Some people call it a corm or a rhizome. I'm just going to call it a bulb. And then you can see the roots at the base here, and then this is the top growth. What I like to do is I like to let this dry for about a week. And I can let it dry somewhere where it's a little warmer and dry. So my garage, my shed. And then after a week, what I'll do is come in. I will remove any of the roots at the base just by cutting them. I will also remove the top growth here. Then I'm going to store these in a cardboard box with a little bit of peat moss. And I'm going to check on them once a month. I don't want them to be wet, but I also don't want them to be 100% dry. And if I notice that they're getting dried out, I can give them a very light spritz of water. But again, I will put links to that video down below so you can see it in more detail, what I do in terms of checking on them and how I wake them up. If you've never overwintered plants, I say give it a try. Let's say you don't have some of the plants that I went over in the video today, like calla lilies or the Dipladenia or the Mandevilla, or maybe you don't have the bird of paradise or some other plant. Go to a garden center. A lot of times this time of year, the garden centers are marking down their plants. So you can find them for a very cheap price. And then in those pots or containers that you're getting, you might be able to get a whole bunch of plants because those plants have grown during the season. It's the end of the season, they don't look good. You really don't have much to lose, and then try to overwinter the plants. Or maybe you bought some of these plants or some other plants during the springtime and you weren't sure what to do with them. Try overwintering them and try different methods. Maybe you can try one method of overwintering a calla lily in a pot, and then you can also experiment with taking all the soil off and overwintering it bare root and see which method works better for you. Some other plants that you can experiment with, and this is just a small list, includes plants like canna lilies, gladiolas, dahlias. The list goes on really of how many plants you can overwinter and the different ways of overwintering those plants. And you may not have an unheated garage, or you may not have a barn or a shed, but be creative with the space that you do have available. And maybe you have a family member that has space available where they live and they can help you out. Or you have a friend or a neighbor that has some space that they can lend to you for the winter months. Check Facebook Marketplace. At the end of the season, sometimes people are just giving away plants for free that they know can be overwintered, like a zonal geranium or a pelargonium, but they don't want to go through the effort of doing it. And they also don't want the plant to die, and they know someone else might want to go through the effort. So keep your eyes and ears open and start looking around for where can you get plants for free or cheap. And then you can start researching and looking up different ways you can overwinter that particular plant. One plant that I've never overwintered, but I know a lot of people have, is fuchsia. I just couldn't get my hands on it this year. I really tried to. So that's one of my garden goals for next year, is to get some fuchsia. Just look for it early in the season, propagate it, and then try to also overwinter it, because I've heard that it's easy to propagate and easy to overwinter. I have a lot of other plants that I'll be overwintering. I'll definitely show you my process for doing that. Some of them are new to me actually, so be on the lookout for those videos. Let me know how you're doing with overwintering. Have you started, or will you be trying something new this year? And if so, what will that be? And until the next video, make it a great day with gardening.